Reddit, what's your top holy shit, that worked moment? To get out of an after hours work event, I came up with the quickest thing I could think of and told my boss that my iguana was sick and I had to get to the pet store to pick up his medication before they closed. I don't have an iguana. The next day I changed my desktop background to a photo of someone else's iguana. People kept asking me for weeks how my iguana was doing. Had the infamous red rings of death for an Oldsbox 360 at one point. Called up a buddy. He told me to turn it off, hold it about 1.5 feet above the floor, and just drop it. I figured that I couldn't make it much worse, so I dropped it. Worked perfectly ever since. Reposting my story from a previous AskReddit thread, my first vehicle was a 1985 Dodge Ram that had around 300k miles on it. Needless to say, it wasn't exactly reliable. Anyway, my friend and I had tickets to go see a concert in a city that was about 3 hours away. We made it there just fine and had a blast at the concert. We couldn't afford to stay overnight, so we started on the long journey home. If all went well, we would get home around 3 AM. There was one stretch of highway where there was 60-ish miles between towns. It's pretty much the worst place to break down on that journey. There were big signs warning travelers to fill up with gas before leaving town, but I had half a tank. My truck sputtered out and died almost halfway between the two towns. It sure sounded like I ran out of gas, but the gauge still showed half a tank. All had not gone well, so there we were, 1:45 AM, stuck on the side of the highway in Texas, 30 miles from the nearest towns, no moonlight, and this was before teenagers had cell phones. We were screwed. After a bit of poking around with a flashlight, we discovered that we did have fuel, but the fuel pump had died. We decided to sleep in the truck and mess with it in the morning. On those old Dodge trucks, the fuel pump was inside the engine instead of in the fuel tank like a modern vehicle. It was powered by the engine instead of an electric motor. Essentially, the fuel pump would constantly pump gasoline when the engine was running, and gas would always be available for the carburetor float valve. The extra pumped gas would just go back into the gas tank. I was just drifting off to sleep when I got an idea. I worked for almost an hour in the pitch dark. I used some extra hose from an agricultural fertilizer, a drink straw, screw clamps, and duct tape to rig the windshield fluid pump to pump fuel from the fuel line into the carburetor float line. I got in my truck, hit the windshield fluid lever, and the truck started right up. It took a bit of trial and error, but I was able to get the timing down where I knew how often to hit the lever to keep the truck running. We made it back home just after 4:30 AM. My dad wasn't immediately amused with my handiwork, but he told all of his friends how clever his son was, so I guess it passed the dad test. Halloween party during college and everyone is starting to pass out, except this very inebriated girl who just won't shut up about wanting someone to turn off the light. I pulled the sleeping bag over her face and said click. She said thank you and went to sleep. My friend and I looked at each other amazing that it actually worked. In high school, I told a girl who was way out of my league, you should give me your number. She asked, why would I do that? I said, because if I just dial randomly, it will take forever to call you. Waited to be shot down. But she laughed and gave it to me. We were together for 7 years. Mine is both a little silly and recent. I was using a trial version of a plugin suite for some software I was using. It's the trial that you can activate, or it just dies after 30 days if you use trial for the key. Contemplating buying because it was so expensive. This suite of plugins for a video editing product cost $1,000. I wasn't considering buying the $1,000 suite. I just wanted one of the plugins that comes with it that cost $400 as a standalone. As I was contemplating, I started poking around for tutorials. I found one by the author. I was a complete tutorial including the license activation. During the video he showed how to enter the code. I thought there's no way. Screw it, I'm going to try. I paused the video, wrote down the number he used in the video, and clicked activate. It activated the entire suite. One time a bird got caught in our chimney, and while me and my roommate discussing how to get it out, he suggested we stick our hand up there and the bird will just land on our finger. I laughed at him and said it would never work. Within 30 seconds he was walking to the door with a bird perched on his pointer finger. Not me but my uncle. Back in the 70s he created a group in high school with 10 of his buddies called the Maple Leaf Work Club. Every Friday during the morning announcement on the intercom, the school principal was inviting every member of the Maple Leaf Work Club to meet at 2 p.m. at the usual classroom. The usual classroom was the bar next door. They did this for 4 years. My son was living nearby and had locked himself out of his room. He called me for help. During my many assignments in the military, I was once stationed with a guy who was also a locksmith. Incessantly told me about locks, lockpicks, tumblers, etc. So I show up at my son's apartment, armed with a basic knowledge about how locks work and 2 paper clips. I half straightened them out, used one to flick the tumblers and the other to pull at the bottom of the lock to turn it. 2 minutes later, I was in. My son says, "Holy shit, you did it." Got serious dad points for that one. Edit was years ago, way before YouTube. When I was younger I was into magic and thought I invented a magic trick that used subliminal messaging to get someone to pick a card. I secretly turned the 2 of hearts over in the deck and handed it to the kid my mom was watching. I asked my mom to name any card, then I said to the kid, "You too, name of kid, whatever card is in your heart," trying to get him to say the 2 of hearts. To my disbelief he actually said the 2 of fucking hearts. I didn't touch the deck for the entire trick and told him to go through it, and he saw his selection turned over. I was in just as much amazement as he was. In school, I belatedly realized I had an essay due the next day, which I simply didn't have the time to do. What I did have time to do was write slightly more than a page. I then printed only the first full page and handed this inside a plastic wallet. I then finished the essay at home that night. So, the next day, when my teacher grabs me in the corridor and says, "You realize you only have me the first page of your essay, right?" I was able to say, "Oh, shoot, the rest must have fallen out or something. I'll go print it out right now and bring it to your office." Reminds me of a story about my very good friend who recently passed away. Shamelessly copy pasted from my other friend from Facebook. Senior year of high school, Anthony and I had the same English class with the infamous Ms. A. During the second half of the school year, we had an essay assignment for Slaughterhouse 5 15 minutes before the paper was due. Anthony hadn't done any work yet. In a desperate hurry, he went to the computer lab, pulled up a Meursault as an existentialist hero essay about Camus's The Stranger that he had written a couple months earlier, then quickly used Ctrl+F to replace every Meursault with Billy Pilgrim, every Camus with Vonnegut, and so on. He took an indented quotation about Meursault shooting an Arab on the beach and replaced it with some random plot event from Slaughterhouse 5. He changed a couple other things as quickly as possible, printed the essay out, and headed to class. Before we handed in our essays, Anthony showed me his half-baked effort. Billy Pilgrim as an existentialist hero. I'd edited his Meursault essay during a peer review a couple months earlier. It was instantly recognizable that this was the same essay. I rolled my eyes at him and said, "You idiot, you're actually handing this in?" He said something along the lines of, "Yeah, I'm totally fucked." About 2 weeks later, we are getting our essays back. As we're going to class, he's running through worst case scenarios with me. My grade already sucks. In that Clash is gonna punish me for plagiarism. I'm gonna fail senior English. They're not going to let me go to Boulder. I'm trying to reassure him that it'll all be fine, but it's half-hearted. It's pretty within Ms. A's character to bury him for this. The papers get passed back. I'm sitting directly across the room, facing Anthony, and I can see his face morph from fear into complete disbelief when he receives his paper. Anthony didn't have the easiest emotions to read, so I mistook his expression for, "Yep, I'm screwed." He looks up at me, then holds his paper up, so I can see it. A+. Ms. A's comments were along the lines of, unbelievable work. To take concepts like nihilism and existentialism that we had learned about months earlier and then to apply them to something completely different is really amazing. Best paper I've read this school year. Bought a used 2007 Honda Odyssey off CL with cash, and 2 hours into my 3-hour drive home, it was bucking and shaking at around 45 miles per hour because of the eco mode kicking in and shutting down some cylinders. Freaked out, worrying I'd bought a lemon and had no way to return it. Did some research on how to disable, fix, blah, blah. Lots of similar stories and dead ends. Comes down that a 10-cent 100 ohm resistor inserted in the coolant temperature circuit makes the van think the engine is not quite up to temperature yet, so it won't engage eco mode. Gas mileage suffers a little, but the bucking and shaking are gone 18 months later. Runs great. You have had an appointment with the soup doggo. It has made nice hot soup for you. Like and subscribe to show your appreciation of the soup.